Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on what part of the country or world that you happen to be listening in from. Welcome to today's part 4, day 4 of ASSA ABLOY Academy hardware applications for hospital hardware. My name is Katie Flower. I will be your lead instructor. Hopefully you've been enjoying this series and getting a lot out of it. Today is especially an exciting one. I really like the openings that we'll be reviewing today. And as we get further into it next week, we'll get into some more complicated openings like pairs of doors with automatic operators and things like that, coordinating with access control. Just to remind you, these sessions are being recorded and will be available on the ASSA ABLOY Academy website for you to review. Or if you happen to have to miss a class for whatever reason, they're there so that you don't feel like you've lost a step. You can stay caught up with the class, and you do need to register for each individual of the 8-part series, and hopefully you've been able to attend a good majority of them, or if not, as I mentioned, review the recording. After the session, within 24 hours, you will receive an email thanking you for your attendance, and that email can be used as your proof of attendance for continuing education credit, self-reporting to whatever that you need to for your continuing education. This presentation today has 3 openings selected from the same hospital that we've been working with, 18-story, very high traffic hospital. And some of the specification numbers will be a little bit older because the project was finished in 2014, and therefore some of the model numbers may be a little bit older, but that's okay. It's still very useful. The information itself is still the same, and the thought process behind how do you select the appropriate hardware. The first opening we'll take a look at today is an in-swing patient restroom. Normally, doors that are on a corridor, a main corridor, and this happens to be in the emergency department. We looked at this clean workroom yesterday. So if you recall the floor plans, it's a very large portion of the hospital. There's emergency department nearby. The exam rooms are here. But any door that swings into a patient toilet, if the patient collapses against the door, you need to have a way to rescue the patient without hurting them. And when we see the door drawn like this, normally swings in with the dark lines, and then the dashed line indicates that the door can be reversed and swing in the opposite direction. That indicates a double acting door, but more specifically for patient toilets, we need to apply what's called rescue hardware. And I will talk about there's a lot of variations and a lot of different ways that we can do this, but the main hanging method that you should be thinking of when you see this kind of door in a hospital is center hung pivots. And I'll explain why in just a minute. But this PP is a push plate. It's a wall switch. It has nothing to do with this door. In fact, you look and you see there's a PP down here for push plate. This pair of doors has an automatic operator. So this push plate belongs with this pair of doors, and this push plate belongs with this pair of doors. Sometimes when you get a lot of different symbols, you have to be able to tell that this does not belong with this door, even though it's closer to that door. Somebody's going to push on that wall plate, and then these doors will open automatically. But this opening is pretty simple as far as the hardware set does not have a lot of items. The hardware set number, there will be multiple doors. There's going to be hundreds of in-swing patient room doors. If they're inside of a patient room, then typically the door will swing out. But if they're on a corridor, then they're going to swing in because the encroachment that we talked about in the codes the other day, when a door swings out onto a corridor, we need to allow that door to swing 180 degrees. And a door that's designed like this, there's absolutely no way to make this door swing 180 degrees because of the jam. This information is found on the door schedule. I put it here for instructional purposes only. It does not go in the specification hardware set. And the specification set, pretty clean. Pivot set, privacy, wall stop, astragal, and emergency stop. Let's take a look at how the door operates, and then we'll look at individual items separately. If you do have any questions, please feel free to ask. Use the Q&A button at the bottom, and we will review the questions as we go. So if you have any questions about this particular opening as we go, feel free to type it in, and we'll make sure to get it answered. I'm not sure if you noticed, but this door is offset in the frame, meaning that it's not in the center of the frame. The door normally swings in, and we offset it so that the strike is located here and the door can swing against the wall and use a standard wall stop. If we look at a center hung pivot, center hung pivots, the pivot point can change depending on how far from the butt edge of the door that the pivot is. And you have a choice in a cased open frame to mount the door in the center of the opening like this one. The wider the jamb, the more that it cuts down on how far the degree of opening that door can swing. But if we offset this, because the door, for 99% of the time, this door is going to swing into the space, and by mounting it offset flush with the outer face or inner face of the frame, that makes it easier to apply hardware. And I'll talk about that more in just a second. You see the center hung pivots at the top and the bottom. There is no intermediate pivot on a center hung pivot set. And by mounting it out flush with the edge of the frame, I can swing this door in 90 degrees against the wall. If this were centered on the frame, I would need an overhead stop. The price of a wall stop is a few bucks, and the price of an overhead stop is going to be over 100. And when you've got hundreds of these types of doors, for ease of operation, and again, the door 99% of the time will swing in. The only time it's going to swing out is if you need to rescue a patient. And the question is, instead of a pivot, can you use something like the PEMCO ERS hinge? Yes, you can. And on behavioral health, that would be the hinge that you would want to use. That hinge is going to be quite a bit more expensive than a center hung pivot. Center hung pivots are typically the way that most owners are going to want to go, partly because of cost. And these can hold doors up to 8'6" in height, and they're usually standard 3-foot wide doors. So there isn't a huge reason to use the PEMCO ERS unless it's behavioral health. Would an overhead stop interfere with the rescue operation function of the door? It has to be a concealed overhead stop. It cannot be a surface mounted. If it's concealed overhead stop, then the door can still swing in both directions and it would not interfere. But you can't use a surface mounted overhead stop. It has to be concealed. And that drives the price up even more, because then you've got the mortise prep in the top of the door. Those are all really good questions. But by offsetting the center hung pivot, you are able to use a standard wall stop, and you're also able to use a standard strike. We'll talk about the strike when we get to the lock set here in just a second. The thing to note, the door must have a radius on the pivot edge. You notice the slight bullnose or rounding of this door edge, and that is so that the door can swing in both directions without hitting the door frame. Securing the door, privacy set is very standard in a restroom, and we're using mortise locks on the rest of the project. There's no need to change here. We went with the M34, the ergonomic thumb turn. This is a Corbin Russwin mortise lock. Sargent also makes an ergonomic thumb turn. You can see it's a little bit bigger, a little bit easier to grasp. You can use the side of your hand to slide this over. Any thumb turn that has a pivot point towards the bottom or towards the top is going to meet ADA because you can use the side of your hand to push it. If it's centered, if it's got a center turn, that makes it a little more difficult, and you've got to grasp it with your fingers and turn it, and that may not meet ADA. That's the big differentiating factor from what I have experienced and seen. We're using the same lever, the 109 lever with the X rows, and you see how with the mortise lock, it's got a nice clean look, small rows, and the emergency release. And then the emergency door stop is made by McKinney. It's got little rubber bumpers, so the door will rest up against this emergency stop. From the video, you saw that it's very easy to push this in. It stays in the retracted position, and then you can pull the door open towards you. This is accepted by the Office of Mental Health, New York State, for high-risk areas. You can use this in behavioral health if you need to. The other option is the PEMCO ERS double-acting continuous hinge with the flush bolt removable stop that will allow you to open the door. You can use those in behavioral health as well, but this will be the less expensive option and more common for your standard in-swing patient room doors. I had mentioned that we use the offset in the center. Instead of in the center of the frame, we're offset hanging this and using a standard ASSA 4 7/8 high strike. Now, could you use a full lip strike that goes across the full width of the frame to protect the frame and the paint? So when you open the door out, you're not scratching the paint. Absolutely you can. And there's a couple different things to take a look at. The full lip strike, you need to make sure to know what your jam depth is. And they're manufactured for cylindrical or board locks. A board lock, the latch is centered in the height of the lock. With a mortise lock, the latch bolt is usually about 3/8 below the center line to accommodate if there's a deadbolt. Now, typically on a privacy set, you're not going to have a deadbolt. You wouldn't be able to rescue the patient if there's a deadbolt. But the mortise lock latch is taller and longer than a cylindrical. So a double lip strike is typically made for cylindrical locks only. It cannot be used with deadbolts. It may work with mortise locks, but you have to consult the factory depending on the compatibility for Corbin, Russwin, Sargent, and Yale. You can get the double lip strike with the combination with the emergency stop built in for offset hung application or center hung application. So you can still use this right here in the application that we had and still use a wall stop. If you're going to go with the center hung, you'd have to use the concealed overhead stop in order to have the door be double acting in both directions. But a mortise lock typically isn't going to work with these, again, because of the hole size and where it's located. The offset of your mortise latch will not line up. You have to have a custom frame height. It just complicates things, in my opinion, unnecessarily. You can use a standard ASSA strike, and you're not going to be swinging the door out very often. If they do scratch the paint, they can touch up that paint for as infrequently as it is used for an outswing door. You're fine using the in-swing ASSA strike. As I mentioned, we can use a wall stop, either the 406 or 409, and it depends on the anchor, what type of wall that you're going into. Because it's a cased open frame and you have a larger gap between the door and frame to have the clearance, highly recommend a visual seal. This is a Pemco 369, A for aluminum finish with the P for the pile, and it's a gray pile. This is curved in, so if it does get damaged, you can slide this out and replace it fairly easily. But it provides sight seal for the hinge side as well as the latch side of the door. So you can't look in and see somebody using the toilet. Here is the hardware set one more time. And do we have any other questions regarding this type of application? All right, let's take a look at the next, which will be a staff restroom on the 13th floor. The next opening that we will discuss is a staff toilet on the 13th floor. I want to take a look at the floor and show you a few things. This particular hospital design has an on-stage, off-stage approach. The patient rooms are on stage. These corridors are exit access corridors for anybody, visitors or patients. And all of the back of house duties and responsibilities are considered offstage. You need a secure badge to get into the offstage area. The elevators are in the offstage area. So behind the scenes, nobody can see all of the machinations that go on behind closed doors, if you will. And that includes this staff toilet. And just to be clear, the elevators that are in the backstage, offstage area are staff elevators only. There are some visitor elevators that empty out into the onstage corridors so that people can go visit their family members. But if you've got anything, staff elevators come up to the floor, and then all of the offstage area is protected. Because it's offstage, that gives us several different options here. And this toilet, if this staff toilet were on a main corridor where visitors and patients were walking back and forth by that, you would want a closer on this door. But because this is offstage and it's not a fire rated, not a smoke partition at all, and it's offstage, this door doesn't have to have a door closer. If the door is ajar and somebody's walking by, it's not going to bother them to see the toilet. Whereas if this were on a main corridor, you really want closers on all of your toilet room doors off of a main corridor, just for, not just to cut down on particular odor, but just for the site. And the other thing that this allows us to do, because it's already behind a secured door, this can just use a regular privacy set. If this were a staff toilet that were located on a main corridor, then a push button combination lock or some other type of locking hardware would be required. The set is very simple, 4 items. We'll take a look at the opening and then talk about each one individually. It's non-rated, right-hand door. You notice on the back of the door there is a coat hook. That can be part of the hardware set, or that can be part of the Division 10 toilet accessories. It really depends on what the hospital wants and needs Hanging the door, it's a 3-foot wide door, so standard weight hinges. And even though there's no door closer on this, just because of the frequency of use, I like to use the anti-friction bearing hinge. They don't cost a lot more than a non-anti-friction hinge, and most every distributor has them in stock. They're very easy to obtain. They're just a smoother operation, and for the small amount of extra money, it's worth it for the longevity of the door and how it's used. Satin chrome, same finish as what we've been using, nothing unusual there. The same lever handle that we've been using, we're going to use the same privacy set as we had on the last opening. The only difference is, instead of just a standard emergency release, this one does have an occupancy indicator. You can get different occupancy indicators depending on whether you want them to say vacant or occupied, or secure, unsecure. And in the case of a restroom, it's going to be vacant or occupied. Green if it's vacant, and I don't know if you noticed in the video, but it turned red when it's occupied. The M34 quick code for the ergonomic thumb turn, we were consistent and use this throughout the entire facility. It just makes it easier for everybody with the larger thumb turn to be able to use. Same lever design and rows as the rest of the facility, and wall stop either 406 or 409. This isn't a smoke or fire door, but again, as a best practice, just to help with cutting down on sound and odor, Smoke Seal is very inexpensive, easy way to do multitasking. Here is the hardware set. Do we have any questions on the difference between a staff restroom that is not on a main corridor versus one that is on a main corridor? And just a reminder that the hardware set, there would be multiple doors in this same set, and they don't all have to be the same size, but if you're selecting a standard weight 4.5-inch hinge, they at least need to be 3 foot or less. Once you start getting over 3 foot wide to 3'6" and 3'8", then you would want to use maybe possibly a heavyweight hinge or a 5-inch high hinge to spread the width of the door, the weight of the door over the height even better. The next opening is a pair of patient room doors, and these are very common throughout a hospital. There's a lot of different ways to address them. Let's take a look at where this is on the plan. The next door opening we want to take a look at is a typical patient bedroom door. They are on the main exit access corridor. If we scroll in, we can see that it is the symbol for a smoke partition. It makes sense, these doors will be non-rated. And as we look and walk down the corridor, here is our horizontal exit on one end, and we had a smoke barrier on the other end. This is the patient room we will take a look at. Before we look at the hardware set, I wanted to point out a couple of things. The design of this hospital, they wanted to, these are borrowed lights here, and when you watch the video, you'll see that the borrowed light has glass that has a louver built into the glass. This way, this desk area, this is a sub-nurse's station. A nurse can sit here and observe 2 patient rooms at the same time. There's also a medical cabinet here with some minor supplies, and then they can go down the hall if they need to get some major supplies. But they've got the ability, they've got a computer here at their station. They can monitor 2 patient rooms at a time. These doors swing into the patient room, unequal leaf. This one swings against the wall, so I know a wall stop here. This one swings against the sink, and I want you to take a look when you're watching the video how yes, you could use an overhead stop, but remember that overhead stops are pretty expensive. You'll see what we did for a solution, but when you're looking at the floor plan, you've got to make note of this and then take a look at your other patient rooms, make sure that they're consistent and that it's not just a one-off, that if the good majority of them are all this same way, they're all going to be in the same hardware set. Patient bedrooms don't typically need to lock. And in fact, there's codes against locking patient room doors, but they do need to latch. They have to have positive latching and be smoke tight. These are smoke partitions, even though they're non-fire rated doors, they do need to be smoke tight. And now let's take a look at the set. 4-foot wide active leaf. The bed is going to come in and out. The active leaf, they'll probably open the inactive leaf when they need to move the bed through. But the nurse, when they bring in the meals or check on them, bring in their medications and things like that, they'll use the active leaf to go in and out. It is smoke rated, not fire rated. The frame does have hospital stops. So take a look at that in the video and see how that looks. We did use swing clear hinges. I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the hanging method and why that was selected. Flush bolt top only to keep cleanliness and no strikes in the floor. And let's take a look at the video and then we'll look at each item individually. Good view of the hospital stop and the swing clear hinges that get the door completely out of the opening when it's open 90 degrees. Is that a wall stop on the sink? Yes. Self-latching flush bolt. So hang the door. The first decision is how to hang the door. You always select the hinges based on the wide leaf of an unequal leaf pair. If you've got a 4-foot wide active leaf, it's wide, it's heavy, you're going to use heavyweight hinges. The swing clear gets us the extra 1.75 inch thickness of the door, because when this door is open 90 degrees, you notice that the door is no longer in the opening. It does not create an area, a good target for the bed to hit and hit that butt edge of the door. It helps protect the edge of the door by hiding it behind the door frame. And it gives you that extra 1.75 inch of clearance so that you may not have to even open the inactive leaf at all. If you do need to open the inactive leaf, it's hung on the same exact swing clear hinge. You have the full width of that frame opening minus the stop on the frame. We're using 5-inch high hinges. Swing clear hinges don't have a width. They only have a height because you can't, it's L-shaped and you can't measure the width of a swing clear hinge. So there's only going to be the one dimension, and 5 inches high because whenever you have a wide door, the 4-foot leaf will take priority over the smaller leaf. The wider the door, the taller the hinge. And we want to do the same exact hinge on the inactive leaf, even though it's overkill, for several different reasons. For one, looks. It would look really funny if this were a 5-inch heavyweight swing clear hinge and the other one were a 4.5-inch standard weight swing clear hinge. Additionally, imagine having to order doors and frames, but frames especially, with one leaf is 5-inch heavyweight, the other leaf is 4.5 standard. The factory would go nuts, you would go nuts. You want to make sure that you always make both hinges the same, even though the unequal leaf is narrower. Top bolt only. The 2805 is a flush bolt that's normally used for metal doors, but part of the mock-up we found that the nurses and staff did not like this all the way at the top of a 7-foot door. That was too high. So they asked, is there any way that we can bring this down to a normal height? And 12 inches down from the top, it has a rod in it, just like a manual flush bolt, but with a spring, and it's spring loaded with a latch. So when you push in on this, you're retracting the latch, you can let go. And when you pull the door closed, it has a beveled latch bolt and a standard strike plate that you can just pull the door closed behind you, and it will latch, it will relatch. You can get these top only, or you can get them top and bottom. The reason we're not using the bottom is for cleanliness. We're using hospital stops on the metal frame for easy to clean, and we don't want any penetration into the floor. We don't want to have a place that can gather dust. The hospital latch works great for patient bedrooms. You don't need locking, so it's just a passage set. You can get them with or without engraving. In this case, there's no engraving. These are non-handed, and you can have the paddles going up or down, or a combination of up and down, or sideways. And it's very easy to use your elbow or the crook of your arm to push or pull the door open. If your hands are full with, you're carrying a tray of medicine or a tray of food, you can just push in on that or pull with your elbow. It's also now with COVID-19 and everybody trying to do the hands-free and touchless type hardware, this is a great solution now, not just in hospitals, but anywhere. You can use this on mortise lock trim with locking function, or you can use this with the tubular. With the tubular, it's a 5-inch back set, and that gets it so that your elbow doesn't bang against the inactive leaf when you're pushing on the paddle. They're also good in behavioral health, but you need to have the paddles pointing down. They do have, it's not ligature proof, but it is resistant because of the shape. And if the paddles are pointing down, then it makes it for the lower levels of behavioral health that you could use that. Just to remind you, code-wise, this is from Chapter 4 of the IBC, corridor walls and doors in corridors that are not needing to be rated in Section 5 shall not be required to have a fire protection rating and shall not be required to be equipped with self-closing or automatic closing devices. In the past, patient bedrooms did require closers. They were required to be 20-minute rated doors with closers. That all changed when they mandated sprinkler systems in hospitals, and the trade-off was, okay, the door doesn't have to be fire rated, you don't need closers, but you do need to limit the transfer of smoke, and you do have to have positive latching. Roller latches are not permitted. Any door on a smoke partition on a corridor in a hospital that doesn't need to be fire rated because of this section can have no closer, but with positive latching. There is a section, the question is, why does the flush bolt need to be self-latching? Could it be a manual one? There is a portion in Chapter 10 of the IBC that says that it has to be self-latching or a surface bolt. Manual flush bolts are not permitted. And I reviewed that. If you need to, go back and review the Day 2, Part 2, which had the code requirements in there. This is a roller latch in case you haven't seen one. And a roller latch has a little bit of a spring and a little bit of a holding power, but this does not hold the door secure enough. If there is the pressures of a fire and smoke, the door would push open, and that's why roller latches are not an option. They're not permitted. They're not permitted in IBC. They're not permitted in NFPA 101 either. We're using an edge guard on the inactive leaf so that if you do just use the active leaf to push the bed through, you can protect this edge of the door as you're coming in or coming out. You could use an overhead stop to prevent this door, the inactive leaf, from hitting the sink, but because of the design of the sink being solid, we went with the Rockwood adhesive, the 432W. These are used a lot in hotels. You can stick them on the bathtub. If the door, a lot of times in a hotel, the restroom is very cramped. The door swings in and it's gonna either swing up against the tub or a shower or something like that. And that's what these were originally designed for, but they also work well in this situation where you've got a door bumping up against a sink. It protects the sink and it protects the door. And they're very inexpensive compared to an overhead stop. And with an overhead stop with swing clear hinges, you do have to look at the templating and make sure that the door is prepped appropriately for that templating. This door does have to have smoke seal. It is required because it's a smoke partition. And the S88 perimeter seal works very well. The Pemco S771 astragal that's mounted on the inactive leaf, that works really nice as well. It's got a very flexible silicone fin. You can get the 772, which is a double fin, or the 773, which is a triple fin, but from experience, the single fin in this case works very well. The door, the active leaf just closes and pushes that up against it. So works great. Here is the hardware set one more time. And do we have any other questions on a patient bedroom door? Okay. This is the final class for this week. The 5th one starts again on Monday, but I do want to introduce, we've got a brand new tool I'm very excited to introduce. It's called the ASSA ABLOY Egress Calculator. You can use it on your desktop, tablet, or smartphone. So if you happen to be at a job trailer, at a meeting with an architect or with somebody, and you're looking at a set of plans and want to take a look at how large that meeting room is, you can do the calculations right on your iPad or tablet or smartphone. It calculates egress width, quantity of exits, the swing direction of doors based on the International Building Code, and it includes quick reference guide to IBC compliant hardware requirements. So for example, if you have an assembly occupancy, it tells you right then and there, delayed egress is not permitted, and it gives you the code reference so that you can go look it up in the IBC. And this is IBC, the different versions based on whatever your state may have adopted. So there's a drop down for the 2006 edition, 2009, 2012, 2015, and 2018. And you can select any one of those and get the code compliant doors and hardware based on that IBC. You can download a PDF and save it to your project file for future reference. And that PDF will give you all of your calculations as well as what you put in for data. Let's say that the room is 60 feet by 40 feet. It tells you that, so you can keep that for your file. And then it gives you all of the output, how many exit doors and the swing direction, whether you need panic hardware, and all the code references. There is an ASSA ABLOY Academy training course that starts, there's one tomorrow, in fact, at 2 o'clock Eastern time. If you haven't registered for it and you want to get a copy of this free tool, please feel free to register for it. There's also others. We're trying to have at least one every other week for ASSA ABLOY Academy so that people can get trained on how to use it. But the tool itself is very intuitive, very easy to use. Whether you're an architect, a spec writer, just need to verify any of these things, you can do it very quickly right there on your desktop. Also, if you're an architect and you don't like to write hardware specifications, we have a big crew across the country and internationally that can do that heavy lifting for you. ASSA ABLOY, DSS.com, services specification writing, and then you can find a spec writer in your area that can come in and consult with you and work with you on whatever projects that you may have. If we don't have any further questions, I want to thank you for your time and attendance and remind you that you can rewatch any of the recorded sessions at any time. Go to ASSA ABLOY Academy, virtual instructor-led training, and then click on the top right-hand side. There's a link to the recordings. I hope you all have a great weekend. If I don't see you tomorrow at that session, I'll see you hopefully on Monday. Have a great weekend.